So let's meet our subject matter expert for the day. Today we've got Dr. Tyler Arvig. Dr. Arvig is the Associate Medical Director for R3 Continuum. With over 13 years of domestic and international experience in behavioral health, workplace absence, including disability and workers' compensation assessment, consultation with employers and insurers on complex claims, effective return to work strategies, program development and improvement, and supervision and training of industry professionals, Dr. Arvig is a sought-after speaker, writer, and contributor in the field of workplace behavioral health and workplace trauma recovery. So thank you for being with us today, Dr. Arvig, and I can't wait to learn more from you.
Thank you, Shane, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'm really looking forward to having this timely conversation.
Yeah, exactly. This should be a good one. So just like the title states, today's webinar will be discussing how businesses can help mitigate workplace disruption caused by personal stress. I think we could probably all say that we've had an incident in our personal life that has taken a toll on our work the next day or even longer than that. So Dr. Arvig, can you start us off by talking about what we are currently seeing in the workplace?
Yeah. And I'm not probably going to share much that you're not already aware, but I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive into a few of these areas. I mean, this is just a couple of things that we're seeing. And our company or our organization has, over the course of the past, 2 years, served, hundreds of thousands of people. In work settings, in a variety of stress-related situations. And so you're probably seeing it and feeling it in your personal work life. We're also seeing it as consultants in this area. The first area that we can discuss a little bit is burnout. And I'm going to show my hand a little bit here. And so, burnout is an overused term, I think. We think of many different types of things as being burnout, and that could be the case. But really what we're seeing is just exhaustion from situations that aren't changing. We have this sense of, and I've described it to folks as every day is kind of seems the same. And those days that aren't the same are sometimes not good days. So instead of having, positive experiences and interactions all the time, the days that are broken up by things we maybe aren't as pleasant. So burnout is clearly one topic, and Shane, I'm happy to, dig deeper into that if you have any further questions on that. The second thing we're seeing is what I'm calling exits from leadership. And this is really occurring on a couple of levels. One is we're seeing people leave organizations, and by and large, they're leaving organizations because of lack of leadership. People change jobs, but the reality is we're seeing, millions of people. In fact, we've seen almost 5 million people leave the workforce completely, recently and not even engage in a new job. So they're just leaving and not even there anymore. And a lot of that comes down to leadership. As we've been dealing with the pandemic and everything that goes along with the pandemic, we're taxing leaders. We're expecting more of leaders than we've ever expected before. And what I often talk about is, leaders are often promoted based on their ability to effectively do the job, not necessarily their ability to be an effective leader. And so we are seeing people that are very taxed by ineffective leadership. And of course, you take the reality of our current situation, where everything is changing, things are very demanding. We're asking a lot of leadership. So if you have poor leadership, we're seeing people go, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I don't want to work for this leadership. The second element to this, or the second level, is we're seeing leaders leave. So, we're seeing employees under leadership leave. We're also seeing leaders exit. because we're asking so much of them sometimes, and maybe because they feel like they don't have the resources they need to effectively do their job. There was one statistic recently, and I don't have it in front of me, but CEO turnover is higher than it's ever been before. And we think of people in those types of positions, and these aren't people, by the way, being terminated. These are CEOs voluntarily leaving the post, which you don't often see unless you get someone that's retiring. So you're seeing even leadership and high-level leadership say, "This is too much for me. I no longer want to do this." Now, it could be that they're taking their golden parachute and going on and doing something that they really wanted to do. But honestly, I think a lot of it is the level of stress and the demand that's there isn't worth the pay or the hassle or the imbalance in their life. So leadership, in my mind, is probably the biggest issue that we have to sort out in the current work environment. The third thing, and I already mentioned this in the previous point, but people are really prioritizing their personal lives over their work lives. This has not always been the case, particularly in America, where it used to be that you'd ask someone, after about 40 years, I'm going to need some time off because I'm going to die. It was I'm going to work and work and work until I retire, and I'm going to be done working. And that was prioritized over maybe sometimes personal needs or demands. We're seeing that shift, obviously, as we're dealing with more personal stress. But folks are now getting to the point where they're going, and this is not necessarily new with just happening in much larger numbers. They're going, my family life, my personal life is more important than a paycheck. And so they are leaving. And this is a problem for employers, because if we can't figure out that balance, and if we can't figure out how to have a productive and engaged workforce while also meeting personal needs, we're not going to find the people that we need to do the work. So Shane, I know I ran through those a bit quick. Any follow-up questions you have on any of those, or anything?
Yeah, I have a couple, actually. So the first one is probably the quicker one. Do you think that stress and burnout in the workplace, I think both of my questions are actually kind of around burnout and everything, but they're all related. Do you think that stress and burnout in the workplace is actually maybe causing more people to leave and realize, I would rather be with my family. Like, it's not worth, you said the paycheck, but the stress and everything that comes with a job, or even with leadership, maybe they don't have the resources or something and they're just burnt out. They can't provide this for their employees. Do you think there's any correlation between that?
Yeah, I think there clearly is. And as every work environment, and I challenge you to find me one work environment that hasn't gotten more complex in a recent time frame. And think about all the things that we're dealing with here. We're dealing with, fear of physical illness, medical illness. And that's still a massive driver. But honestly, right now, we're seeing the secondary or tertiary effects of all of this. It's not purely, I'm afraid of getting sick. It's all the other stuff that goes along with it. So we have, in many work environments, and, I'm working from home, Shane is working from home. I'm guessing several of you on this call are working from home. But we have to remember that working from home is only really possible for maybe, a sixth or 1/6 or 1/7 of the workforce. Most people don't have that option. And so there's fear of physical illness. As we have people leaving, and we know that we do, what that means is for everyone that's left over, there's more to be done. Because just because I had 30% of my workforce leave doesn't necessarily mean that there's that there's less work to be done. Also, many organizations are feeling financially strapped, as we see this in the service industry. the service industry is probably the industry that's going to see the most mass exodus as restaurants and retail and some of those. They're getting hit every single day, and they tend to not be the higher paying types of positions. So we're going to get people to go, this just isn't worth it anymore. I'm going to go find something else. So there's fear of physical illness. There's business realities, doing more with less, and honestly, the other piece of this is, because of some of these factors, and organizations are more financially strapped, we're not seeing some things that we might want to see. We're not seeing people perhaps getting pay raises to the extent that they want. Some people have taken pay cuts because that's the reality of the situation, where businesses don't have the cash flow they used to have. So all of these things kind of congeal to what we sometimes think of as burnout. But really, burnout is a lot of different factors. As an individual, burnout's not just one thing. It's a bunch of different things that I got to figure out, what am I going to do about it? How are these things affecting me, and how do I address them?
Yeah, sure. I think you made some great points, and I completely hear you on the service industry. I mean, that's something I'm sure we've all run into. Like, our favorite restaurant is not open on a Monday or a Tuesday. They're only open on, the weekends or something like that. And I've started to notice that even happening more and more. And it's also interesting to see when those days shift. I think there was a restaurant by me that was closed for every Wednesday, and then now they're open on Wednesdays but closed on like Tuesday, Thursdays. So it's kind of an interesting way that they're kind of seeing this. They're obviously noticing it and how it shifts. And I know it's not the only industry that does it. So you said that burnout.
They're also dealing, just in this, plays in the restaurant industry. It also plays in healthcare and in retail. They're dealing with public that's sometimes they're very pleasant. We go to a restaurant and we're maybe a little bit annoyed because they're short-staffed, because they can't find the people. And then things are delayed or mistakes are made. And, early on in this pandemic, we might have, been, hey, we get it. We're with you. We understand. No big deal. But as things have drawn on and continue to, we get numb to that. And then we do start to get annoyed, and we do see situations where people are, behaving poorly in public, where they shouldn't, or saying things they shouldn't, or getting mad about something. And that just feeds into the problem. Then you got more people that say, I don't want to do this anymore. Why would I want to put up with, with the perceived abuse or mistreatment or ungratefulness or what have you? Yeah,
absolutely. Back to kind of like burnout and everything. You mentioned at the end there that you think burnout is kind of a culmination of many different things, which that makes total sense to me and everything. But as a leader, do you know, maybe a couple tips or anything that if you were a leader, that you would tell your employees, ways to kind of combat burnout? Maybe it's getting up to go for a walk or something like that.
Yeah. And it really depends, because again, how I experience burnout as an individual is going to be different from how Shane might or how someone else might. And what leads into that is going to be different. But as a leader, I really want to be observant. I want to be observant of my people, engaged in conversations, asking questions. One of the bigger pieces, I think, that plays into the burnout dynamic is when it feels like my boss or my employer or what have you, they don't care about me. So I'm sitting here and I'm grinding it out and doing what I can, and no one gives a shit about me. It feeds into that sense of, I can't do this anymore. But if I have a leader who is checking in with me from time to time, asking questions, again, encouraging me to, like you said, Shane, go take a break, go take a walk. One of the things that in our organization, in many organizations, is a lot of us end up with a bunch of time off that we don't use. And they're even doing things like encouraging people to use their time off. As, hey, guess what? You have it and it's there. Use it. Do something with it. Leaders, you can address every aspect of burnout, because there might be a piece of burnout that's my own psychology. There, I might be feeling a sense of burnout because there's these things going on in the workplace, but I also have things going on at home, and maybe I have kind of overlaying mental health conditions, which the majority of folks right now will tell you that their mental wellness and their mental well-being is a primary factor, primary issue. In fact, a larger issue for most people than their fear of physical illness. As a manager, I can't address those things necessarily, but we'll talk a little bit later about things you can do if you have a concern about employees who might be struggling with more personal things that are showing up in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what it comes down to, like you said, your first point, we've been harping this since, the beginning 2 years ago, but communication, I think that's got to be, that's so key to be staying connected with the employees. And of course you would know better than I would, but I think that's just the best way to put it, is making sure you're connected and communicating with everybody so that everybody knows that you care, type of thing.
Absolutely. Go
ahead.
It's communicating to show that you care, and also sharing information. And if you don't communicate and people are on an island, they're going to fill in mentally. If I don't give you any information, you might assume the worst. Whereas if I give you information, maybe that changes your mindset or your perspective. We see employees that are really frustrated with their employers about things, sometimes for issues that aren't really issues, but that employer really hasn't disseminated very well what they're doing about it. Whereas if they would have, people would maybe feel better about the current state of things, or what's being done maybe behind the scenes that they're not aware of. So communication, yes, very important.
Excellent. So let's move on and kind of talk about what's the current landscape for personal stress?
Yeah. And by the way, I know this seems like we're kind of looking at what is and looking backward, but really this isn't. It's really more looking forward, but looking at kind of what our experience has been, because we need to learn from the experiences that we've had. So current landscape for personal stress, I don't need to tell anyone any of this. We're all feeling it, right? So better in some ways, not in others. What do I mean by that? That's kind of a bogus statement. Well, we've gotten better at doing some things and adapting to a inherently challenging situation. But in other ways, things aren't getting better because they're dragging on, and maybe someone used the analogy of, at the start of the pandemic, medical staff, it was people were very supportive and treating them like heroes. It was like World War II, like we're in this and we're doing something really important and it's meaningful and it's hard, but we're going to get through it. But as time has gone on, it's become more like Vietnam, not World War II. Vietnam, where it just drags on. It doesn't seem like there's an end, and no one really appreciates it as much as they used to. And we don't have the goals we used to have. It's just harder. So while we've gotten better at some things, we've leveraged technology for healthcare more recently, which is awesome. Everyone's getting used to using telemedicine. It's easier to access treatment. Some people have made changes in their personal lives that have been really impactful. But at the same time, other things drag on. And sometimes it seems like we see the end in sight and then the goalpost gets moved. So we just got to be aware of those things. I think we're all tired. It goes to the last point we just made. And the third point here, sometimes we're just, I don't love this wording, but letting loose because we can. early on, we might have been uber careful about how we approach certain things, but now we're just so fried, or frustrated or unwilling that we're doing things we wouldn't have done early on. We're going out to the bar, being around crowds, or we're not masking, or we're taking an airplane somewhere, because we feel like we can now and we have to. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but I think it's just been a very confusing situation for a lot of us. Again, there is also the sense of, to heck with it, what does it matter anyway? That's not unusual. I mean, if you look at other similar types of situations, humans can only, at the beginning, we might have white knuckled it, hang on with both hands and do what we can. But we can only do that for so long before mentally we just can't do that anymore. And maybe we even get to a point where we're doing things that we'd consider to be reckless. And if that's the case, again, we're humans, we have individual freedoms, we're going to do what we're going to do. But as a society and as a human race, I think we're getting to that point where we're starting to get really frustrated. And you're seeing it in other, you're seeing, and this is worldwide, not necessarily here in America, you're seeing protests and pushbacks against some of the mandates, some of these other things. And that's just human nature going, I was okay with it for a while, but it's starting to really wear on me now. Doesn't mean it's good or it's bad. It's just kind of how we work. We can't do that forever. And the last point is, I have non-pandemic factors here, but that's perhaps poorly worded. Non-medical factors are really what I'm talking about here. Again, early on it was, how do I stay healthy? How do I stay physically healthy? Now, as vaccines are more prevalent and we've made some changes, for many people, the threat of physical illness is not the primary one, but we're dealing with a lot of after effects. We're dealing with, an economy that has been really challenging. Inflation right now has been a big factor. And, that's, sometimes we think about those things as being, on a macro level, but inflation affects us all. Every time you go to the grocery store, fill up your car with gas. So there's those factors as well. We're also seeing, and this is not new, but ongoing political disagreements and people getting very tense, heat up over things, because of the 24-hour news cycle. And we can't discount those things, because honestly, at this point, those things are going to be large drivers for our feeling of personal stress. And obviously, and we'll talk about this more later, mental health was maybe not the initial concern when it came to personal stress. But as our attention shifted away from, keeping people physically safe, we are seeing significant concerns regarding mental health for, workers and school children and everyone else. And these are really significant things, and things that we need to be paying attention to, not only today, but going forward.
Yeah, those are some awesome points. And I don't really have any questions on this one, but I will say, thinking about the third bullet point here, like letting loose because we can. I think a good example of that I personally saw, at least from some friends and everything, was traveling over the holidays. It was kind of like hey, we're in this for 2 years. It's open. I deserve to kind of go see my friends and family or wherever they went. And they had a great time when they were there. It was that relaxing time. And then they're coming home realizing, wow, now I'm more stressed out than ever. What if I could be sick? Or what if, like there's just a lot of guilt and a lot of pressure. It's kind of like that double-edged sword type of thing where it's like, letting loose, but then it actually kind of like, it's like a delayed stress, if you will. And I think that the way you kind of put that was a very, very interesting and made a lot of sense there.
Yeah.
So moving on, what does all of this mean for an organization?
Good question. Well, first of all, every organization should be thinking long-term, not short-term. At the beginning of this, in fact, I was listening to a radio program this morning. It was around shutting down non-essential services, and it was like, don't worry, it's only going to be for a couple of weeks. And initially, that's how we thought. We thought 3 feet in front of us because that's what we knew. Well, we're now well into this, realizing that this is not short-term. This is very much long-term. And I'm not just talking about the virus here, because we'll at some point get to being, in some state where that's not the primary concern. But what's happening in organizations is going to be long-term. The service industry will be forever changed by this experience. Retail will be forever changed by this experience. And people's needs to balance out personal and work, as has become front and center right now. They're realizing, oh man, I really can't be prioritizing my work over my family. I need to give attention and focus to both. That's not going to change. We can't put this genie back in the bottle. It's very much similar to when people initially started working from home. This is going to be temporary. And now many large organizations are saying this is not going to be temporary, this is going to be permanent. And some appreciate that and some don't, and we're going to get flexible there. But that flexibility is not just for the rest of this year. It's going to be for the next 10 years or beyond. This is a major event, and we've seen this throughout human history. Times of great disruption are the apex, or the center of when things start to turn or change. The Great Depression, World War II, whatever it happens to be. Those events, we saw significant and lasting changes to how society functions. This will be no different for organizations and employers. So don't be thinking about, we're just going to do this for the next 3 or 6 months. Think about, what are we going to do long term? Because if you want to keep people and you want to keep your talent, you got to be thinking long term. Related, the second bullet point here, but we need to figure out how business needs can coexist or even thrive with employee needs. Our mindset used to be that, if you were focused on your personal stuff, you weren't working, and if you were at work, you weren't thinking about what was going on at home, in very kind of siloed in our arenas, right? And what we're realizing is that's going to have to change. Now, it's not going to change for every organization. I'm working 10 feet from my kitchen, and I can get up and start dinner when I get a 5-minute break. That doesn't work for everyone. But every organization is going to have to get better at this, even ones that traditionally aren't. If you're a big box retailer, yeah, you're not going to have your cashiers working from home. But guess what? You are going to have to do something so that they feel like they can achieve some better sense of balance between getting their work done and meeting their personal needs. The other piece of this that's important is, I think, we need to get away from the notion that balancing things out means people are going to be less productive. One of the examples I'll use in our company experiences, and I think many companies did, we didn't have the company as a whole working from home because there was concern, legitimate concern. What if people aren't as productive when they're working from home? You know, what if I start watching Maury Povich instead of doing my work? I don't know if Maury Povich is still on TV, probably not. But again, I haven't seen daytime TV in I don't know how long. But the point is, there was concern about if people are working from home, they're not going to be doing their work. What we have found as an organization, and what I think a lot of organizations have found, is actually people are just as productive, if not more productive, even though they might be working from a home environment. So those are the kind of things we have to capitalize on, because some organizations are going to get flexible and do that. Others will not. And those that are not willing to get flexible on that are going to suffer the consequences of people leaving and finding the organizations that are. Again, if you're not meeting my needs, I can find someone else or some other organization that will. Related to that chain is really the last point. You know, people are going to leave, and they're going to leave for preventable reasons. I may choose to leave this job and go open up a Subway restaurant, right? And maybe that's because that's one of my life goals or whatever it happens to be. That's fine. That's different. But most people are not, you know, if I'm happy and I'm fulfilled and I feel like I have good leadership in my organization, I'm not likely to want to leave. Now, maybe I have something that comes up. I have a spouse that becomes ill or whatever happens to be, and I have to leave. That's different. But if you have people voluntarily leaving to go find other work, you need to really take a long and hard look at why is that happening? What is happening here where I am losing quality people? And you know, our go-to is, well, you know, they offered them more money. Okay. And maybe they did. And money's important. It pays the bills. It allows us to do what we need to do. But money is rarely the reason that people jump ship. It might be a factor. But if we really look at why are you leaving this organization, you need to look internally and go, why are people leaving this organization? What doesn't mean, you know, just random exit interviews as people are on their way out the door. It means really looking at asking your folks, what keeps you here? What do you love about it? If we had to change anything, what would we change? Showing that you value them is really going to be key. But don't make the faulty assumption that if people are leaving your organization in droves, it's because the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. It might be greener on the other side of the fence. It might be something in your organization that you got to fix.
I think those are some excellent points. And yeah, I like that, you know, it could be that the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, or it could be that the grass on your side of the fence is just becoming dried up, you know, and
Yep,
I think
exactly.
that's a great way to look at it too. So one question kind of on this slide. So say you are in an organization and you're a leader and you're seeing people, you know, that are leaving. They're clearly not happy with the way that things are going, things like that. How would you communicate or get this across to, say, leadership that things need to change, otherwise people are going to continue to leave, even, you know, myself? How is that something that you would bring up?
Well, it depends on everyone has a role in this. Now, if I'm not a leader, but I'm just an employee who reports to leadership and I'm seeing things or noticing things, I want to be able to talk to my leadership about that and say, hey, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I'm noticing. Not saying they need to do anything about it or whatever, but if I'm seeing something in an organization that isn't working real well, I want to be able to talk to someone about that. And what if hopefully you're comfortable enough with your supervisor, but if you're not, HR, whoever it happens to be, people in middle and upper leadership need to know what is going on in the organization. So if you're aware of something that they're not, communicate that information. As a leader, as a manager, I want to be touching base with my people excuse me, all the time, routinely, about how are things going? Is there anything we can be doing differently? Do you have any advice? One, that's a good way for you to get information about some things that aren't working. But two, it shows that you value their input. If I feel valued as an employee, I'm not likely to leave the organization. And above that, at the highest level, the executive level and above, I really want to have a pulse on what's going on with my organization. Sometimes we see a disconnect, sometimes a massive disconnect between, the CEO level and even middle management. And they're not seeing the same thing, so they're not being given the same information. And, if you want to keep people, and I think we all want to keep people in our organization, I really got to start looking at why are we losing people? And more importantly, the people that we aren't losing, how are we keeping them? How are we keeping them engaged? How are we asking questions? How are we showing that we value them? And again, valuing them is not necessarily giving them a bonus or a bigger paycheck or a raise, although those things are always nice. But it's showing that you value them as people, and that they're critical to your organization and your success and all those kind of things. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And again, everything just keeps harping back to communication. You can't really get over how important that is, especially now.
Yeah.
So we've kind of talked about how personal stress and everything is affecting people and organizations and what it's causing. But what are you supposed to do if you have an employee that is struggling? I asked that right as you took a drink. Sorry.
No, it's all right. So, yeah, I mean, and let me just start this slide off by saying you have people that are struggling, period. It's not a question of if you have, it's you do have them. Just do you know which ones they are? So first off, you need to be observant. Do I know what's going on with my people? If Sally or John, I notice a behavior change, or they start dropping things, or something seems unusual, am I asking them about it, right? Am I inquiring? I'm not making assumptions about the reasons for what I'm seeing, but just simply, how's it going? Are you doing okay? And a piece of this that I like to throw in there is, when you're asking these things, it's not the Spanish Inquisition, right? You're not digging and you're not trying to get them to divulge inappropriate personal information. It's connecting with them on a human basis. And for a lot of us, one effective way to do that is to say, hey, it seems like you've been struggling a little bit. This has also been hard for me, and sharing, not oversharing, but being a little bit transparent with, these personal stressors that we're talking about are not just affecting people that report to you. They're affecting every single person in your organization, including your executive leadership. So being able to ask and also share a little bit to allow that transfer of information. Again, we want to be appropriate. I'm not digging about people's private mental health information or physical health information. Just showing that you care is important. The second piece here is really, if you have an employee is struggling, what can you do to help them? It's antiquated thinking now to have the default response be, here's HR's phone number, right? I mean, HR has a lot of great resources and your people should use them. but what can you do to really help support them? And it might be connecting them with someone in HR, but doing it in a more appropriate way, not just like, hey, here's the phone number, give them a call, but maybe warm transferring them over. Again, showing that you care about them more than, oh, we have this resource over here and here's how you contact them. There's other options as well. I mean, if you have multiple people struggling, or, our company's done tons of work, and we always have, but for a lot now, in supporting groups of people that are experiencing significant stress, disruptive events. And so you can bring in outside consultants, maybe if you have a group that you're really worried about. There's lots of options, but know what those options are, and be willing to put a little bit of time and effort into helping people find them and guiding them, and maybe even following up. If you get someone goes, hey, I'm going to reach out to our EAP and try and get some help with this, and I'm not going to dig on that, but maybe I follow up. Hey, how's it going? I know I gave you the resources. Is that working okay? You don't need to be a therapist or medical professional, nor should you be, because that's not your role. But do be helpful. The third piece is, directing folks to resources. And again, the most important part of that is knowing what the resources are. We know that most employees have access to an EAP, yet in any given year, the percentage of people that utilize the EAP is in the single digits, even though the percentage of employees that report mental health as a significant challenge or a primary issue for them is maybe 60 or 70%. So we know EAPs are out there and we have access to them, but they're not utilized to the extent that they could be. Know what your resources are in your organization and be able to share those for folks that need it. It's just really critical for us to go a step beyond and go, well, XYZ organization, yeah, we have this number, call it. Guess what? When people are struggling, it's sometimes a lot of effort to call that phone number. So if there's anything we can do to provide that additional support, to warm transfer resources, do it. It's really helpful.
I think those are some great points and ways to do that. If you were an employer, I mean, obviously, like just kind of communicating everything, but what are some other resources available besides an EAP? I mean, many places probably do already have these, but what are, if it's a new organization or somebody, just looking for more, what are some other options out there for them?
Well, yeah, good question. And there's lots of them. So there's, most organizations are going to have some form of private health insurance. And obviously, if you have employees that have private health insurance, they have access to any benefits that are, included with that, which include mental health benefits. So, if in an EAP is also generally a shorter term benefit. So if you have someone that's maybe struggling with a longer term issue or more complicated personal type of issue that needs ongoing support, they may be better off utilizing private health insurance. There's also lots of resources, including, apps on your phone. They're all over the place that are actually quite helpful with some basic stress management techniques and some of those kind of things. And there's obviously a ton of resources out there on the internet related to how people can manage stress and do work-life balance and all those kind of things. Also, and I mentioned it earlier, telehealth is becoming, it's going from a minority of health service providing to, it's probably not quite a majority, but much more easily adopted. I can now see a physician or a therapist or a psychiatrist without even leaving my home. I can do it from my phone or my computer. So access to health care is also much easier than it was. So for most folks, there's resources that are going to be available. Now, you might have someone that doesn't have, let's say they don't have health insurance, and there's not an EAP available. Then I'd maybe pull in HR to say, hey, I have an employee who I think is struggling. Is there any way you can look into maybe what some resources might be? Because the reality is you're going to have a lot of employees that do need and would benefit from professional help. And this is not just a matter of helping them with their personal problems. There's a direct correlation between what I'm struggling with, my personal life, and how effective I am in the work environment in terms of getting work done, interacting with colleagues, being focused on job tasks, all those kind of things. So there is a relationship between all the things we're talking about, which typically we wouldn't think of as being work-related, and how someone presents and how effective they are in the work environment.
Okay. And we just had a comment come in that, I think is really relevant to this as well. Like, how would you come up if, say, you had a employee that you wanted, realize maybe they could be struggling, or they've even expressed that to you? Is it appropriate to say something like, can I have an EAP call you? It's, confidential, or how would you go about that as a leader?
Good question. In most of the time, EAPs you're going to need to call them. They're not necessarily going to reach out to you, but you can warm transfer. Maybe, you hook them up with someone in HR and they call the EAP together, because we want to maintain people's privacy and the confidentiality, but also make sure they really are getting the help they need. And sometimes the prospect of picking up the phone and calling the number is hard. So if you need someone that really needs the help and there's a resource there, figure out, how do I get them hooked up? Great question.
Perfect. So we have about 10 minutes left or so. So I think we have plenty of time for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to send those in. I also think what you just said was an excellent point to kind of transition into a nice promo for our upcoming webinar. So our upcoming webinar is going to be on reducing stigma of mental health in the workplace, and ways that leaders can support employees' mental health, as well as kind of looking in like the grand scheme of things about like how mental health has shifted since the beginning of the pandemic and more. That will be taking place on February 15th at 12 p.m. as Central Time. So this will be a really good one. We'll have Dr. George Virgolius on there for that webinar as well. So with that, let's get into a few questions here. Let me see. So if you have any, we've got, like I said, 10 minutes. Feel free to send them in. This one came in a little earlier and we did somewhat answer it, but do you have any other suggestions of ways, it says, what are some suggestions for combating pandemic fatigue / burnout? And I know we did kind of handle the burnout side of things, but what about, just being kind of over the whole pandemic? Do you have any tips for people for that?
I wish I had better tips. I have some. I think one of the things we can do and we can encourage people to do is certainly stay informed, but not overly so. And I think one of the main drivers for pandemic fatigue, outside of, folks that work, in medical settings or they're physically faced with it day in and day out, is it's all over the news. There's lots of back and forth about it. There's opinions on it. There's new information on it. And sometimes we can find ourselves, it's like, oh my gosh, I spent 3 hours today watching the news on the pandemic. Well, the reality is you didn't need to see all of that. There might be a couple pieces of data that are really important that day, but the rest of it is noise, it's fluff. I mean, 24-hour news channels, how 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 they fill 24 hours is they come up with stuff to talk about for 24 hours, and this is what it's going to be. We can overload ourselves with information. We can instead of just having a meal and walking away, we can sit and gorge ourselves on it. So limit what you're consuming when it comes to information around the pandemic. Also be mindful of what's important for you to know in your life and what's not. So I sometimes joke with my wife. She'll bring up something that was on the news. I'm like, well, I don't really care. It doesn't affect me. It's not that I really don't care, but I need to be focused on things that matter in my life right now. And so, I can't get myself overly worked up or concerned about something that's not me. So just be mindful. I think a lot of pandemic fatigue is our own constant, and we all have phones with news and highlights and social media and blah, blah, blah. Shut that stuff off. Maybe you make a rule that after a certain time you're watching Netflix or you're watching something else. Just get away from it when you can get away from it. I think that's probably other than what we talked about, I think that's probably my other biggest point.
So this actually transitions like perfectly into the next question here. So you mentioned earlier that politics are a major stress factor. And like you just mentioned, if I go on Facebook, I don't know about everybody else, but sometimes I just get more stressed out than I was even not on there, just seeing some of the takes and everything like that. And, so is there any way if this goes into work, so say somebody checks Facebook at work and they see something that maybe fires them up and they want to talk to somebody else about it, and that could fire them up, or, and maybe then there's another opinion and now people are like, going against each other type of thing. So what are some ways that leaders could try to keep politics conversations to like a minimum between their employees? And like, how would you go about doing something like that?
That's a tough one. Make a rule that if someone talks about politics, they're automatically fired. No, that really won't work. Look, we're all individuals. We all have opinions. We all have viewpoints. I think, you certainly don't want people to feel like they're muzzled or they can't express themselves in the work environment. But we also got to be aware of, respectful of other people's stances or opinions, and realizing that, sometimes my opinion isn't important. It doesn't relate to what I'm doing in the work environment. Now, I think where this gets a little bit stickier, and we're seeing it with, the vaccine mandate and then the Supreme Court, calling it unconstitutional, or some, local jurisdictions are putting, rules in place that others aren't. There's no easy answer on it. But I think at the end of the day, what we have to realize is everyone, beyond people's opinions and what they think, everyone's a human. And everyone is a real person with real lives and families and loved ones, and they experience births and deaths and marriages and divorces. Whether I'm, extremely liberal, extremely conservative, it doesn't matter. And so when we can kind of get beyond the vitriol piece of it and the, argument piece of it and see the person behind it, for example, I could be extremely, pro-vaccine for a reason that you don't know about, or I could be extremely anti-vaccine for a reason that you don't know about. And, our goal is not to change people's minds or to win arguments. Our goal is to treat each other as individuals and as people, and respect that there are differences. And yeah, those differences are going to occasionally create conflict or tension. But as leadership, how you manage that is really critical. We can't prevent all conflict or, issues in the workplace, but we can look at how are we addressing those? Are we doing it in an appropriate way or an inappropriate way? Are we hearing people or just shutting people down? Or frankly, are we as a company, allowing certain voices to be louder than others? It's a really difficult balance I don't have an answer to, other than at the end of the day, I have to be able to see the person behind it. And if I can see the person, I'm less likely to be aggressive or combative and go, that's John. John's a person with a family and problems and work challenges like everyone else. Even if I don't agree with him on a particular issue, it doesn't matter. So, good question.
Yeah, and I think that's we've all seen that with the term like keyboard warrior or something like that. It's a lot different when you see people in person. Absolutely. So this may be our last question since we have just about 2 minutes or so left here. So from what you've seen, do you think that working remotely or hybrid has been ultimately positive for mental health? And do you think it could be detrimental to some to return to the office at this point?
Good question. I'll say that work from home is not ideal for a lot of people. It is for some, and for others, it's a challenge because there are some people that need that personal interaction and need a reason to get out of the house, get dressed, and commute to work, and all the stuff that some people hate. They need it, and sometimes if you're working from home, maybe you're single, you're the only one there, you're physically isolated. So it's not going to be a one size fits all. The odds of forcing everyone to go back to work, well, you might, and people did it before and they'll do it again. Now they might make other decisions because, you're less flexible than organization B. But when it comes to how people work, we really have to look at what works for them. I am not the kind of person that wants to work from home for the rest of my life, but I probably don't want to go back in the office full time either. Probably a hybrid. But it's going to depend on a lot of factors. So great question. And it's something that we need to constantly be evaluating. What's best for the organization, what's best for the workforce when it comes to whether we're doing remote or in person or a combination of both.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to kind of wrap everything up is, it's always keep an eye on everything. Everything is going to constantly be changing. Just like you said, I think that's a fantastic way to put it. So we are at the top of the hour here and we don't want to take up too much of everybody's time. So thank you all for being here today. Just as a reminder, you can find more resources under the widget tabs at the bottom of the screen. And be sure to check out our resource page. We have a ton of information there, upcoming webinars, this webinar on demand, and everything like that. So we will be emailing this as a recording. It should be coming at you in the next couple of days. So be on the lookout for that, as well as some more information for our upcoming webinars. So that will wrap up our webinar today. Thank you to everyone being in the audience and joining us for our first webinar of the year, and have a wonderful rest of your day.